Hi and welcome to this week's episode of the Pulse Regen Strategic's Policy and Politics podcast. I'm joined today not only by Libby Lyons, Strategic Counsel of Regen Strategic, but also Ellie Whiteaker, the WA Labor State Secretary, Campaign Director and Senate candidate for the upcoming 2025 federal election. Welcome, Ellie. Welcome, Libby.
Welcome, Ellie.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you both.
No, we're delighted to be able to steal a little bit of your time in a compressed week ahead of Easter and Anzac Day, and obviously there's no quiet weeks in politics, but during a federal election campaign, off the back of a state election campaign, you probably feel like you deserve a holiday at some stage.
I'm not sure that's coming anytime soon, but that's okay.
No. Well, not long to go until the federal polls open, and obviously that election day on May the 3rd. As we sit here today, it feels as though some of those polls at national level are solidifying. The policies are very tit for tat. It feels like there's a housing policy announced early in the morning by one of the major parties. There'll quickly be a policy in the same space rolled out in a few hours' time. Libby, first of all, how have you viewed the election launches that we had over the weekend, and particularly those housing policies designed for first home buyers?
I don't think we saw anything new in either of the launches. I mean, a campaign launch is a campaign launch these days. There's always a bit of razzmatazz and colour and excitement from the party faithfuls, and they're always a great thing to watch. And if you're mad about politics, like some of us, so I thought that there wasn't anything terribly surprising there. I think the tit for tat policy announcements is a bit boring. I think I really wish one or other would step up and do something a little bit different and out of the ordinary, but it is very much tit for tat at the moment. In terms of where we're going from here, I think it's really too hard to tell and too tight to tell at this stage. I think anything could happen, and as we know, a week's a long time in politics and we've got a couple of weeks to go yet. It'll be interesting to see just how much happens over Easter, whether people take a bit of a breather, and I hope they do, because I think we all need a breather. Be nice to have a little break from it all for all of us, whether you're involved in politics or not. So I think we've got an interesting few weeks coming up, but we've certainly had our share of pollies over here in WA, and I'm sure we'll see.
A hotbed.
Yeah, it sure has, and I'm sure we'll see some more over the coming days. We've also seen lots of former prime ministers on both sides, which has been pretty. Always great to see the former PMs come to town. So in that sense, I think there's been a lot of fundraising going on, I look forward to the next couple of weeks, but hope that we have a little bit of a breather over Easter.
WA is the centre of the universe, the way we like it. Yeah. Ellie, I mean, your reflections on the campaign launch would be great to have, given that, in part you were hosting it, given the Australian Labor Party launched in Perth on Sunday. But how have you found the campaign period, given that it's taking in so many public holidays, a period of time where it feels like a lot of Australia signs off, particularly over that Easter period?
On the campaign launch, it was really great to have the Prime Minister launch Labor's campaign in WA for the second election in a row. And I think that just really shows how important Western Australia is, and certainly the importance that the Prime Minister places on WA, not simply in terms of winning the election, but actually in terms of delivering for Western Australians and tackling the issues that people care about. And I think you really did see that off the back of the launch and what the Prime Minister announced, particularly around housing. Yeah. And I know for young people, getting into their first home is something that's really important. And so it's great to see the Prime Minister making announcements to that over the weekend. It is a really interesting time to be campaigning. Again, this is the second election in a row where we've been campaigning, federal election in a row where we've been campaigning over Easter. It was the same in 2022. And it's a challenge. I mean, it's really hard to cut through at the best of times. Yeah. certainly we see people engaging less and less with politics, particularly young people. And so when you add school holidays, Easter, Anzac Day, that makes it even tougher. And, we often say to our campaigners, it really just means less days to get out and talk to people because people do want to take a bit of a break from politics. So that's a challenge, but we'll make the most of every moment and talk to Western Australians about what they care about and hope it's enough to get us over the line.
Yeah, and the extended campaign period we've had, I guess, with state election being a fixed term, held early March, but then that really quickly rolled into an elongated federal campaign, irrespective of when the Prime Minister called it. Has that had an impact on voter attention, their levels of engagement? Have you detected with your counterparts in other states whether there's less ability to cut through in WA as a result of all that campaigning?
I don't think so. I often say that I do think voters understand the difference between a state election and a federal election, the state government and the federal government, and we haven't picked up too much frustration at people. I talk to our candidates who are out on the doors, and most of the time they're really happy that they've got someone knocking on their door asking them what matters to them and talking to them about what, in our case, a Labor government would do in a second term. And so we haven't picked up too much on that fatigue. I also think Western Australians are used to going to elections. We've had a lot of elections over the last...
Yeah, that's true.
Really that's more than a decade between state elections, federal elections, Senate by-elections, other by-elections. So it's actually, in my time as a party official and in the years leading up to that, been a pretty heavy election period. So I think Western Australians are just used to it by now.
Yeah. And Libby, you have been more involved in the Liberal Party campaign. You've seen the way in which state parliaments returned last week. Seems like there's, as we talked about, a few more colourful characters on the opposition benches, particularly in the Legislative Assembly, and they feel it feels as though they've made an immediate impact to the atmosphere of the place. There seems to be a renewed level of energy in WA Parliament.
I think there is on both sides, and I think that's great for Western Australia and it's great for our democracy. I think there were a lot of nerves on the opposition side, and understandably so.
Daunting.
New job, very daunting. Sitting in the chamber for the first time, is not for the faint-hearted by any stretch of the imagination. But I think as things settle down over the coming weeks and months, we'll see people start to hit their strides, and we'll start to see, hopefully, some really good debate. And I think that's what we need. That's what, as citizens, we all need and we deserve. We all deserve accountability from our politicians and good debate, and from those debates often come great ideas and other things. So I think, yes, all the new members have got a lot to learn, and I think that with common sense, they'll sit back and they'll learn quietly. But I think, as I say, over the coming months, we will start to see a revitalised lower house chamber in particular, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah. And Ellie, did you get a chance to break away and have a glance at WA Parliament last week?
I did go to the swearing in of the Legislative Assembly, and that was great. Mm-hmm. We couldn't attend the swearing in 2021 because
of course.
It was COVID restrictions, so we had to watch it online. So it was really nice to be able to go and watch them be sworn in, and there is a real energy around a new parliament, I think, and a bit of nerves, a bit of excitement, and there's a number of new members across all sides of the chamber, and so I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens in that chamber over the coming months. But no, it was great to see them all. And
the result, now that we're sitting here, we know the composition of the lower house. I think the upper house is it yet to be declared?
It's yet to be declared.
Yeah, okay. But, even taking the lower house, 46 seats for Labor, 7 for the Liberals, 6 for the National. Is that I mean, I don't want to get too inside baseball with it, but is that about where you thought things would land? And when did you have a feeling that that would be the sort of re-elected result?
It's a really funny game, the insider baseball of managing expectations of where the result will land. It was certainly a much stronger result than we expected. Personally, I'd always set the goal at 2017. That was a historic win at the time. And I thought if we can get equal to a 2017 result, that would be an outstanding win for the Labor Party. It would be a really good endorsement of Roger's leadership as Premier. I think he's a brilliant leader, and we were certainly seeing in the lead up to the campaign that people really liked what they were seeing of him and what they were hearing from him. And so I was hopeful that it would be a really strong endorsement of that leadership and what he had to offer. So we were hopeful of a 2017 or just above result, and of course we ended up quite a few seats ahead of that. So extremely happy, a little bit surprised, but it was a great outcome.
Yeah. And Libby and I have been talking about, I think something that the political parties couldn't do too much about, the WAEC, and the difficulty with managing the voting process, that component of the election and then the count thereafter. What's that been like for you, sort of watching one out and one back over the last couple of weeks?
It's really tough, particularly when there are candidates. And in any election, in any electorate, someone's waiting on a result and one of them is going to get over the line and one of them isn't. It's really hard when you don't know the outcome of the result for those candidates. And so that was really tough in terms of for those candidates waiting on the outcome. And, of course, it's painful to wait. And, for the Legislative Council still waiting for that result to come through, it's been a long wait. We're very keen to see whether we managed to win the 16th seat in the upper house, 16th seat in the upper house. But it is what it is. We'll wait patiently.
Yep.
And wait for the inquiry, I think, too.
Yeah, true. I mean, Shane Love's made fairly strong running early days about the inquiry. I think obviously that needs to be handed to the special inquirer. It's an independent process. I think there are some dangers at muddying the waters too much and we create this perception that there's an element of corruption or, not quite the big steal and that language that was used in the US, but there was something underhanded at play. I think it was just a process
I think it was just poor mismanagement.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just that to me, it just was, some poor decisions were made and I don't know. I think, as you say, let's wait and see what the inquiry uncovers. But I don't think there was anything, from my perspective, I don't think there was anything underhand involved at all. I think it was just mismanagement with a capital M.
The early voting seems to be the component that's thrown everything out in terms of planning and resources, distribution of campaign centre staff, election booth staff. Did you pick up on the same challenges given that extension of the early voting timeframe?
So the early vote was not too different to 2021 in terms of numbers, and so I don't think that is an
excuse.
A reason not to have been prepared for that. I think you're right, though. I think it is really important that we don't. That there's not some kind of undermining of public faith in our electoral system, because overall it is a very good one. And while we want to make sure that everyone is able to vote in a way that is accessible and as seamless as possible, and those processes should be the best they could be, and I think an independent inquiry is the right way to get to the bottom of what of that management was not quite right this time. And so we'll see what the outcome of that is. I'm not sure why, what led to to where we are. It has been really, really slow in terms of the count, but also clearly there were some logistical problems in the lead up to Election Day, and we'll see what the inquiry has to say about that.
Yeah. You've been involved in campaigning at a state level and national level for a substantive period of your career, Ellie. How has that changed over the course of say the past decade? Because thinking back to 2014, we were living in a very different world, engaged with politics and politicians very differently than we do now. What have you observed over that time?
It's really interesting and one of my favourite topics to talk about.
Glad I did.
If we think about the way that we communicate with others around us, whether it's friends or family now compared to how we did a decade ago, I think we'd all notice that there have been some quite substantial shifts. If you think of the way that we consume news and information, there's been a really substantial shift. And so everything from social media, both in terms of the platforms that people use and the types of content that goes well or not well on those platforms, the way we message people that we care about or the way that we communicate at work, all of that has changed really significantly over the last decade. And that makes campaigning more challenging in lots of ways. For example, we have to think quite strategically about the types of content that we put on Facebook compared to the types of content you might put on TikTok compared to what you might put on Instagram, compared to what you're putting in people's letterboxes. But it also presents a lot of opportunities as well. It used to be the case that you could just put one ad on the television and everyone saw that ad. Now you can be much more targeted about that. So we can advertise on catch-up television or YouTube at an electorate level, which this is really the first election that we've been able to do that. The last election, it kind of operated the same way as broadcast TV. So that means if you're living in the state electorate of Perth or the federal electorate of Perth, and you're watching maths on catch-up TV, then you can get an ad from your local member of parliament or your local candidate running in an election. And I think that's a great opportunity for people to see politics at that local level and hear about not just what a party or a candidate might do across the whole country in the case of a federal election, but hear about what they might deliver for them at a local level. And I think that's really powerful. The news cycle, which is now 24-hour, people have it literally in the palm of their hands on their mobile phones. It makes cutting through with a message much more challenging because just the sheer volume of information that people are consuming, and so that makes it tough for us to talk to people about the issues that we would like to talk to them about. And so it really forces candidates and political parties, I think, to get their message right and to talk to the issues that people actually care about, because if you don't, then you just won't cut through. And so I do think the way that we have to campaign in 2025 does mean that we do have to be better about tailoring our message and our policy offering to voters, because otherwise they just won't pay attention.
Yeah, it's dizzying, isn't it? The ability to target, but I guess you've got more tools at your disposal to guide that as well. So you're better informed, and campaign resources are there. So
that's right.
You're all set to go.
Much tougher job though.
Yeah,
much tougher job.
Yeah,
than it was
no
decade
doubt.
or two ago. To have to target to a particular audience.
Yeah.
And especially when you're talking about a federal election.
Thousands and thousands of pieces of content. Our creative teams, our advertising teams, our digital teams are much larger than they've ever been before because,
they have to be.
They have to be.
Yeah, yeah. And is that having an impact on, Labor traditionally has targeted, this ground game, if you like, around being on on the footpaths, on the doors, that sort of red shirt wave that has been talked about in context of the WA election recently. Has that had an impact in terms of the ability to ensure a message is still getting out to neighbourhoods that might not be as engaged on social media or might be slipping through the cracks of some of that targeting?
That's really the one thing in terms of how we campaign in the Labor Party that hasn't really changed since we started focusing on that direct voter contact method of campaigning about a decade ago. In that it's still really important. And I mean, I say to candidates and campaigners all the time that really the best way to persuade a voter is to have a conversation with them one-on-one. And those voters who often do shift to the dial at any given election are not coming and knocking on a politician's door or walking up to a candidate at a community event and asking for a chat. And so you really do have to get to those voters where they are, and that's on their doorstep. And so that still is a really important part of our campaign. We knocked on hundreds of thousands of doors in the state election. We're doing the same in the federal election. And so it's to it being a tougher job, it really is just you need more people over here, but you still need the others over there.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I don't think there'll ever be a substitute for door knocking.
No, it's so powerful, isn't it?
It is very powerful. I don't think there will ever be a substitute for it. And I would also say that, and look, people do want that personal contact. They like to be able to think that, or they like to know that somebody actually bothered to care, to not to pound the pavement and knock on their door, or to be at their local shopping centre on a Saturday morning. That's that personal touch that we're still all human, and so that's very, very important. And I don't think that will ever go away. And I remember as a little girl doing it with my dad. So it's it will never go away. I don't think we'll ever. And I would hate to see. I think we would lose the essence of politics in Australia today if we lost that.
Yeah. Yes. And Ellie, you're an upcoming candidate for the Senate, and obviously all the best with that. Although your ability to campaign directly probably is a little limited. You're a bit tethered to Labor HQ at the moment. What are you looking forward to getting your teeth into should you be elected?
Thank you. I'm really thrilled and honoured to be a candidate for the Senate. It does feel strange being on the other side of the campaign sometimes when I'm used to being in the office behind the scenes, but I'm really enjoying it. I am really looking forward to hopefully adding to the strong Western Australian voices in the federal parliament. I think it's a really interesting time for WA and the WA economy as we start to look to what's next and what more we can do to remain the economic powerhouse of the country. And so the Albanese government's agenda on a future made in Australia is one that I'm really passionate about and one that I think WA can play a really strong role in. And we've, of course, heard the state government talk a lot about their Made in WA plan. And I think those two things together mean that we're in a really strong position to make WA a real powerhouse of manufacturing again. And we're also heading into a really interesting time for defence industries over the next decade or so. And again, I think Western Australia is well positioned to be at the centre of that. And so they're the two things that I'm most excited to get into if I am elected.
Yeah. And I mean, as you listed a number of those areas of interest, it's very clear the centrality Western Australia all of a sudden has in a federal election contest. That it didn't feel too long ago that the night was sort of wrapped up before the polls had closed in WA. We had a few of those elections. Libby, how have you perceived the two national campaigns of the major parties?
Well, look, I think Western Australia is very important, but we always are when there's a boom. It's when our economy is not going as well that we don't seem to really matter. But Look, I think the focus on Western Australia has been really interesting. I think, it frustrates me. I haven't been over east for a month or two. I get a bit frustrated because I think we do live in a little bit of a bubble here, and we're not getting a real feel for what is happening in the rest of Australia. I think that Victoria is going to be very interesting, a very interesting state to watch at the federal election. I think I think from what I'm hearing from family and friends in Victoria, the Labor Party will see a big swing away from them. Whether or not that's going to be significant enough, who knows. New South Wales, I think the Premier's been doing reasonably well there, Minns. So, but again, I think that'll be a very interesting state to watch too. I think, again, as I say, I think we're sort of a little bit isolated from and Ellie, you'd have more idea as to what's happening on that eastern seaboard, but we do tend to get caught up in our own little world a bit much and forget about what else is happening in the rest of Australia. I think it's a big country. Queensland again, Queensland is always traditionally very conservative, so there'll be some interesting seats to watch there, and I think there'll be surprises all over the country, really, for both sides. And I think the campaigning, interestingly, we saw the Liberal Party launch their campaign in Sydney, which was,
Western Sydney. Yeah.
Western Sydney, I think, yes, clearly there are voters to be picked up there. So I think Victoria is going to be being a former Victorian myself, I think that's going to be a very, very interesting state to watch, because traditionally, for the last 3 or 4 decades, it's been very Labor state, ALP supported state. I think that's moved a bit, and I think it will be very interesting to see what happens there.
And the other, I think the other factor has been this so-called third candidate in Donald Trump. I mean, a month or two ago, you would have probably thought there's some. Wouldn't agree with it necessarily, but I can understand the rationale. There's a political advantage of mimicking at times certain policies and positions. The currency of that seems to have really fallen away quite quickly, and all of a sudden there seems to be a few missteps and maybe some backtracking on some of the Trump light politics that had started to enter Australia. So I wonder how that will continue or change perhaps over Easter, Anzac Day, and then all of a sudden into election weekend.
Oh, I think it has changed, and I think some of the backtracking that Trump's done lately has been interesting to watch. I think the Labor Party have absolutely grabbed hold of trying to liken Trump and Dutton and whatever, which I think is an absolute nonsense. I understand why it's being done, but I do think it's a nonsense, and I think it is. I think Trump's quickly being. I think the damage that was done early on to the markets and the backtracking that had to happen really by him has been significant. Yeah. And I think that there are still a lot of leaders around the world who are still terribly worried about the fallout from further Trump. I don't want to say silliness, really. It's not the word I wanted to use, but well done. Being polite. We've got a lot to worry about with him, and I think that the rise that China and Russia are getting out of this is a bit scary, really. So, I'd rather see us back off from that and focus more on what we can control, and that is actually building our relationship with a president who's very unpredictable at the best of times.
Yep. Ellie, is Trump a factor? Has it been a noticeable part of the WA campaign or the federal campaign?
There's certainly a sense that and an understanding that these are really uncertain and challenging global times, and there's no doubt that people are feeling that and seeing that. I think when people are consuming news, I mean, it's dominated by Trump and what's happening in America, and then, of course, how that impacts us and others around the globe. And I think that will be a factor in terms of how people vote on the 3rd of May. So I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out at the ballot box. But my sense is that people in Western Australia really don't want that American-style politics, which unfortunately we have seen creeping in to some of our politics here in Australia. They don't want that to be part of Australian political culture. And I think that is we are seeing a bit of hesitance in voting for the coalition off the back of that. I think the Prime Minister said it really well at the launch yesterday, where he said that, on the 3rd of May, voters don't get to choose the circumstances that exist around the world, but they can make a decision about the type of leader and the type of government that will manage that over time and work in Australia's interests. And so we'll see how that plays out. But it's certainly on people's minds. I mean, how can it not be?
Yeah.
Just to my silly Trump quote, I mean, you did hear about the legislation he's trying to introduce that he needs to get Congress to pass to make those water restrictors that go into shower heads and taps illegal.
We talked about having a 15-minute shower.
No, to wash his beautiful hair. He does have a sense of humour. He does make me laugh for that, I have to say. But spending
if you didn't laugh, you'd cry.
Well, precisely, spending time on, getting Congress to vote some legislation to take the water restrictors out of
it's so jarring, isn't it?
Goodness
You're going
me.
from that to trade tariffs and market chaos.
Practically market chaos and recession, and we're talking about restrictors in shower heads. But anyway, look, it does make us laugh, and we've got to be able to laugh because there hasn't been a lot to laugh about coming out of America lately. So.
No, that's true. Ellie, thank you for joining us. Any predictions ahead of federal election, or are you tight-lipped?
Look, I think it will be close. There is still a long way to go. It feels like it'll be, it feels 3 weeks feels like a long way away, but actually it feels like it's not a long way away, but it is in terms of campaigning.
There'll be long days
time.
For you.
That's right. And so, we're feeling positive. The momentum of the campaign has been really good, but we'll see what happens on the 3rd of May.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for joining us, Ellie.
Thank you
We
for
really
having
appreciate it. We'll continue our coverage of all things WA and federal politics post the Easter break. But thanks again for listening and joining us. We'll speak to you soon. Thank you.